In ancient Egypt, death was never the end. It was the beginning of eternity. The art of mummification was not just a way to preserve the dead. It was a sacred science born from faith in the afterlife. Every oil, every linen wrap, every prayer had a purpose, to keep the body intact so the soul could live forever. From the simple desert burials of pre-dynastic times to the perfected mummies of the 21st dynasty, this practice evolved into one of humanity's most sophisticated rituals, blending religion, medicine, and craftsmanship. Today, we open the pages of Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren Dawson to uncover how ancient embalmers turned belief into science and death into immortality. Discover the full story, only on For Science Salah Lotfy channel.
Welcome to For Science Salah Lotfy channel, where science meets curiosity. في هذه القناة لا نكتفي بعرض الأبحاث العلمية، بل نترجمها إلى المعرفة التي تصل إليك أينما كنت. Our mission is to make global scientific research understandable, accessible, and multilingual. جميع الفيديوهات العلمية هنا مترجمة إلى اللغة العربية، بالإضافة إلى لغات عالمية أخرى. French, Spanish, German, Urdu, and more. Because science speaks every language. نعم، العلم يتحدث بكل اللغات، ونحن نحرص أن يصلك بلغتك. If you're passionate about science, you're in the right place. اشترك الآن وابدأ رحلتك مع العلم خطوة بخطوة. For Science Salah Lotfy channel, العلم للجميع.
Nearly a century ago, a remarkable book was published in New York by the Dial Press. Its title, Egyptian Mummies, authored by Grafton Elliot Smith, one of the most prominent anatomists of his time, and Warren R. Dawson, a distinguished historian of medicine. First released in 1924, this book offered one of the earliest scientific studies exploring how the ancient Egyptians mastered the art of preserving the human body for eternity. Beautifully illustrated with woodcuts by A. Horace Girard and K. Lee Pemberton, it combined precise observation with artistic detail, capturing both the science and the spirit behind Egypt's most mysterious legacy. A timeless journey into the science of immortality, only on For Science Salah Lotfy channel. In ancient Egypt, death was never the end. It was the beginning of an eternal journey. The art of mummification was not simply a method to preserve the dead. It was the Egyptians' sacred science of immortality. Every incision, every oil, and every linen wrap carried meaning, a dialogue between life, death, and the divine. Today, we explore the hidden logic, faith, and technique behind one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. Egyptian mummification, as revealed through the detailed historical and technical study Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren R. Dawson, a book that remains a cornerstone in understanding how the ancient Egyptians turned faith into science. The roots of mummification go back to Egypt's earliest days, long before the first pyramid rose. Bodies buried in the dry desert sands were naturally preserved, leading the ancient Egyptians to a powerful realization. The body must remain intact for the soul to live on. This idea evolved into a religious necessity. Linked to the myth of Osiris, the god who was dismembered and resurrected, every deceased Egyptian became an Osiris, reborn into the afterlife through the sacred work of the embalmers. Over centuries, this belief shaped Egypt's civilization, inspiring sculpture, architecture, craftsmanship, and the rise of a priestly profession dedicated to preserving the vessel of the soul. Our knowledge of mummification comes from two main sources, Greek historians and Egyptian papyri. Herodotus in the 5th century BCE described three methods: the luxurious, the moderate, and the simple. The most expensive involved removing the brain through the nose with iron hooks, cleansing the body with palm wine, filling it with aromatic resins, and soaking it in natron for 70 days. Cheaper versions omitted some steps, relying instead on cedar oil or natron baths. 4 centuries later, Diodorus Siculus added striking details: the cost of each procedure, the preservation of the heart and kidneys, and the ritual chase of the cutter, symbolizing the taboo against wounding the sacred body. But Egyptian texts tell a deeper story. The ritual of embalming papyrus, written in the Roman period, reveals the spiritual choreography behind each step: the chants, anointing oils, and magical formulas intended to reawaken divine essence within the deceased. Meanwhile, the Rind papyri confirm the 70-day timeline and describe materials like resin, myrrh, and cedar oil. Together, these sources show two perspectives: the technical view of outsiders and the spiritual vision of Egyptians themselves. The art of mummification evolved alongside Egypt's dynasties, a silent testament to over 3 millennia of refinement. Early dynasties, the challenge of form. During the Old and Middle Kingdoms, embalmers focused on the outer appearance. They wrapped bodies in thick linen soaked with resins, creating a hard shell that resembled the person's statue, as seen in the famous Maidum mummy. By this time, the removal of organs had begun, with the appearance of the canopic jars. The New Kingdom, the mastery, within now, technique reached new heights. The brain was routinely extracted, the arms crossed upon the chest, and even the face was restored to lifelike beauty. In the reign of Amenhotep III, embalmers began underskin padding, inserting materials beneath the skin to restore natural shape and vitality. Masterpieces like the mummies of Yuya and Thuya showcase this golden age of perfection. The 21st dynasty, the summit of realism. Here, embalmers achieved breathtaking precision. They filled the cheeks with clay or fat, restored the limbs with sawdust and linen, painted the skin, inserted artificial eyes, transforming the mummy into a living image of the deceased. For the Egyptians, this was not imitation, it was rebirth in form. Later periods, the decline. Eventually, the ritual became superficial. Craftsmanship gave way to decoration. Bodies were coated in hot bitumen, turning them black and rigid, while lavish outer casings replaced inner care. Some mummies even contained mixed bones, signs of a fading art once sacred and exact. The mummy was never alone. It journeyed to eternity accompanied by chants, offerings, and symbols of protection. The funeral procession moved solemnly toward the tomb, led by priests and mourners. At the entrance, the opening of the mouth ceremony revived the senses, allowing the deceased to eat, breathe, and speak in the afterlife. Inside the tomb, the mummy rested within nested anthropoid coffins, human-shaped, richly painted, and inscribed with sacred texts. Nearby stood the canopic jars, each guarded by one of Horus's 4 sons, Imseti, Hapi, Duamutef, and Kebesenwef, protectors of the vital organs. Among the linen layers, priests placed amulets, the heart scarab to silence guilt before judgment, the Jed pillar for stability, and the knot of Isis for divine protection. Even the incision used for organ removal was sealed with a gold plate engraved with the Eye of Horus, symbol of healing and completeness. Beyond religion, mummies became priceless medical archives, preserving evidence of ancient diseases and daily life. Examinations revealed cases of tuberculosis, arthritis, and dental decay. The mummy of Ramses V bears marks consistent with smallpox, while fractures treated with wooden splints prove early orthopedic knowledge. Each preserved body is not only a symbol of eternity, but a scientific document of the human past. From the deserts of prehistory to the gilded tombs of Thebes, the journey of mummification tells the story of a people determined to defeat death through knowledge and faith. It was both science and spirituality, fused in perfect harmony, a dialogue between human skill and divine aspiration. Even today, the Egyptian mummy stands as a timeless witness to a civilization that sought not only to preserve life, but to perfect the body for eternity. To uncover more about this extraordinary chapter in ancient science and belief, follow For Science Salah Lotfy channel, where we explore the intersection of history, discovery, and human genius, one story at a time. Behind every great book, there are great minds, and Egyptian Mummies is no exception. Written in 1924 by Sir Grafton Elliot Smith and Dr. Warren Royal Dawson, this work remains one of the earliest and most influential scientific studies on mummification in ancient Egypt. Today, on For Science Salah Lotfy channel, we meet the two men who brought ancient bodies and their stories back to life. Born in Grafton, New South Wales in 1871, Grafton Elliot Smith was an Australian-British anatomist whose curiosity about the human brain shaped an entire generation of biological science. He studied medicine at the University of Sydney, later moving to Cambridge, where his fascination with the anatomy of the brain and its evolution began. In 1900, he accepted a post at the Cairo School of Medicine, just as Egypt was becoming the focus of international archaeological exploration. Here, Smith's scientific precision met the mysteries of the ancient world. He became one of the first scientists to use X-rays on mummies, opening a new era in non-destructive archaeology. Through his analyses, he discovered patterns in bone diseases and brain structures, linking ancient pathology with modern medicine. But Elliot Smith's influence extended beyond anatomy. He was a believer in hyperdiffusionism, the theory that major human innovations, from writing to architecture, spread outward from a single origin. And he traced many of these back to Egypt. Whether or not one agrees with this idea today, his passion helped establish Egypt's role as a cradle of civilization. For his pioneering contributions, he received the Royal Medal in 1912, became a Fellow of the Royal Society, and later served as Professor of Anatomy at both Manchester and University College London. In a world still learning to connect science with history, Grafton Elliot Smith stood at the intersection, proving that every body, ancient or modern, tells a story of the human mind. If Smith was the scientist of the body, Warren Royal Dawson was the historian of the spirit. Born in Ealing, London in 1888, Dawson's life took an unusual path. He began as an insurance agent, not an Egyptologist, but his passion for learning transformed him into one of Britain's most respected scholars of ancient medicine. Encouraged by E.A. Wallace Budge of the British Museum, Dawson began studying Egyptian hieroglyphs and the art of mummification in 1914. Although he never traveled to Egypt himself, his meticulous research and collaboration with Elliot Smith brought him close to the heart of the ancient world. Their partnership gave rise to Egyptian Mummies, a book that blended Smith's anatomical insight with Dawson's deep understanding of Egyptian texts and rituals. Dawson later became a biographer of Egyptologists, publishing Who Was Who in Egyptology in 1951, a monumental work that still serves as a key reference today. He also catalogued important scientific manuscripts for the Medical Society of London, the Linnean Society, and the British Museum. Honored with numerous academic fellowships, including the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Dawson's precision and dedication preserved not only Egypt's past, but the legacy of those who studied it. Together, Grafton Elliot Smith and Warren Royal Dawson gave the world more than a book. They gave it a bridge between science and belief, body and soul, past and present. Their work, Egyptian Mummies, published by the Dial Press, New York in 1924, remains a cornerstone of mummy studies and paleopathology today. On behalf of the For Science Salah Lotfy channel, I am Professor Dr. Salah Lotfy from the Egyptian Atomic Energy Authority, paying tribute to these brilliant minds, Sir Grafton Elliot Smith and Dr. Warren Royal Dawson, for giving immortality a scientific form and turning ancient silence into knowledge that still speaks today. In the heart of ancient Egypt, death was not an end. It was a sacred transformation. For over 3,000 years, the Egyptians believed that preserving the body was the key to eternity. This belief was so strong that it gave birth to one of the most extraordinary sciences in human history, the science of mummification. In this episode, based on the classic 1924 work, Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren R. Dawson, we will uncover how this ritual began, from natural preservation in desert sands to a spiritual philosophy that shaped Egyptian civilization itself. Long before pyramids or pharaohs, the earliest Egyptians noticed something remarkable. When bodies were buried directly in the dry, burning sands of the desert, they did not decay. The heat and dryness absorbed the body's moisture, leaving behind a naturally preserved form. Skin, hair, and sometimes even facial features remained intact. From this simple observation emerged one of humanity's deepest beliefs. If the body remained whole, the soul could live forever. The ancient Egyptians didn't see death as annihilation, but as a temporary separation between the body and the spirit, a separation that could be reversed through the right rituals and preservation. Thus, what began as a natural coincidence became a religious imperative. The body must endure so that the soul could return. The Egyptians believed that every human being was made of several spiritual components, the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak. The Ka, often translated as vital essence, required a physical home after death. If the body were destroyed, the Ka would perish too. This is why preserving the body became more than an act of care. It was a duty of cosmic importance. The body was the vessel of identity. It anchored the spirit to existence. As G. Elliot Smith observed, mummification was not an art born of fear, but of faith in life's continuity beyond death. At the center of this belief stood Osiris, the god of resurrection. According to myth, Osiris was slain and torn into pieces by his brother Set. His wife Isis gathered his scattered limbs, reassembled his body, and restored his life through divine rites, the first act of mummification. From that moment, Osiris became the ruler of the afterlife, the eternal model of rebirth. Every deceased Egyptian sought to follow his path, to become an Osiris, reborn through ritual preservation. The embalmer's work thus became a sacred imitation of Isis herself, restoring order to the body, recreating wholeness, and awakening the spirit within. Each bandage wrapped around the corpse symbolized renewal. Each oil applied was an offering to the gods. As faith deepened, so did technique. By the dawn of the Old Kingdom, mummification had transformed into a specialized craft. Embalmers, both priests and artisans, combined observation, ritual, and chemistry to achieve what nature once did by chance. Their knowledge grew through generations of careful practice. Each experiment brought new understanding: how to dry the body without deforming it, how to preserve facial identity, how to use resins and salts to protect against decay. But even as their methods evolved, the religious meaning never changed. Every gesture was an act of devotion meant to secure the eternal home of the soul. In Egyptian Mummies, Smith and Dawson describe this balance between science and spirituality, where technical precision served a divine mission, the conquest of death through preservation. From this single belief that the body must survive, a whole civilization was born. It inspired the building of tombs instead of graves, the crafting of statues as substitutes for the Ka, and the creation of temples as eternal houses for the dead. Even the Egyptian language reflects this worldview. The word for to sculpt also meant to give birth. Every statue, every coffin, every painting was an act of regeneration. To remember the dead was to keep them alive, and to preserve the body was to preserve the self. From the silent deserts of prehistory to the sanctuaries of the gods, mummification emerged as the Egyptian answer to humanity's oldest question: how can life overcome death? Through observation, devotion, and artistry, they built a bridge between worlds, where science served faith and the body became a map to eternity. We'll explore how ancient historians like Herodotus and Egyptian papyri revealed the hidden steps of this sacred process, the rituals, the tools, and the techniques of those who dared to preserve immortality itself. This is For Science Salah Lotfy channel, exploring the science of eternity through the eyes of ancient Egypt. How did we learn the secrets of Egyptian mummification, a craft once guarded by temple walls and sacred oaths? For centuries, the art of preserving the dead was hidden within the rituals of the priests of Anubis. No outsider was ever meant to witness it. Yet somehow the world came to know the steps, the tools, and even the prayers of those who prepared the body for eternity. In this episode, based on the detailed study Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren R. Dawson, we uncover the two great sources of our knowledge: the classical accounts of Greek historians and the ancient Egyptian texts themselves. Together, they reveal two worlds, one fascinated by technique, the other devoted to sacred purpose. Our first window into mummification comes from Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BCE. In Book 2 of his Histories, he describes three distinct methods of embalming, each reflecting a different cost and social status. The most elaborate method, reserved for royalty and the wealthy, began with the removal of the brain through the nostrils using an iron hook. Then a sharp flint knife opened the left flank, removing the organs. The cavity was cleansed with palm wine and aromatic resins, myrrh, cassia, and cinnamon, before the body was laid in natron for 70 days. The second method, cheaper but still respectable, avoided incisions. Instead, the body was injected with cedar oil, which dissolved the internal organs, later drained from the body. The third and lowest method was purely external, the body washed and left to dry in natron with no internal treatment. Herodotus's tone was clinical, almost scientific. He admired the craft but did not understand its faith. For him, it was a wonder of technique. For the Egyptians, it was a journey of the soul. 4 centuries later, Diodorus Siculus, another Greek historian, recorded his own version after visiting Egypt. His account, though inspired by Herodotus, added ritual context and human drama. He noted the price of each procedure: 1 silver talent for the finest, 20 minae for the middle, and less for the simplest. He also described a peculiar ceremony. When the incision was made, the man responsible, known as the parashistes, or the cutter, was immediately chased away by onlookers, who hurled stones at him. This act symbolized the deep taboo surrounding the mutilation of the sacred human body. Diodorus also observed that the heart and kidneys were left in place, for they were believed to be the seats of thought and life. Such details show how the ritual mixed medicine with metaphysics, preserving what was considered divine within. While the Greek historians described what they saw, the Egyptians themselves wrote what they believed. Their records, though far rarer, reveal the spiritual heart of mummification. One of the most valuable texts is the Ritual of Embalming, a papyrus from the Roman period. It describes not a technical manual, but a sequence of prayers, anointments, and invocations. Every part of the body, from the mouth to the feet, was touched with sacred oils, while priests recited spells ensuring divine protection. The words were as essential as the resins. Another source, the Rind Papyri, mentions the famous 70-day period for the entire process. 40 days for drying, 30 for wrapping and ceremony. It lists ingredients such as resin, cedar oil, frankincense, and myrrh, and describes how priests represented gods like Anubis and Horus during the rites. These documents make one thing clear. To the Egyptians, embalming was a liturgy of rebirth, not a mechanical act. G. Elliot Smith and Warren Dawson emphasize that both sources, the classical and the Egyptian, are vital, yet profoundly different in spirit. The Greek writers, viewing from outside the temples, saw an astonishing craft. Precision with instruments, mastery of preservation, and a mysterious 70-day procedure. But what they could not see was the purpose behind the act. To them, removing the brain was a technique. To the Egyptians, it was a rite of purification, cleansing the vessel for the soul's return. The Egyptian papyri, in contrast, rarely mention tools or methods. They dwell on words of power, blessings, and the transformation of the deceased into a divine being. While Herodotus saw a physical process, the priests saw a recreation of the myth of Osiris: death, dismemberment, restoration, and eternal life. Thus, the classical sources captured the hands of the embalmers, while the papyri preserved their hearts. Modern science, using X-rays and CT scans, confirms many of Herodotus's observations. The brain removed through the nose, organs extracted, cavities filled with resin. Yet only the Egyptian texts explain why these acts mattered. Each stage mirrored the divine restoration of Osiris, the cleansing of impurity, the wrapping as rebirth, the sealing as resurrection. Even the number 70 had sacred meaning, echoing the duration of Osiris's reconstruction by Isis. What the Greeks described as chemistry was in truth theology in motion, a physical path to eternity. From Herodotus's astonished gaze to the whispered spells of the priests, two worlds converge in one mystery: the Egyptian mummy. One reveals the method, the other the meaning. Together, they preserve not only the body of the ancient Egyptian, but the story of humanity's first great attempt to conquer time. We journey deeper into the craft itself, tracing how, from the earliest linen wrappings to the lifelike realism of the 21st dynasty, Egyptian embalmers perfected the art of eternal preservation. This is For Science, Salah Lotfy channel, where history and science unite to reveal the eternal secrets of ancient Egypt. Across more than 3 millennia, Egyptian embalmers transformed a simple desert practice into one of the most advanced biological and artistic sciences of the ancient world. Their goal was never merely preservation, it was recreation, to restore the body as a perfect vessel for the eternal soul. In this episode, based on Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren R. Dawson, we trace the technical evolution of mummification, from the earliest wrappings of linen and resin to the extraordinary realism of the 21st dynasty, and finally, the decline that followed in Egypt's later centuries. This is the story of how the Egyptians learned not only to preserve life, but to sculpt eternity itself. In the beginning, the desert did the work. Bodies buried directly in Egypt's hot, arid sands were naturally preserved. The heat drew out moisture, halting decay. When tomb construction began to isolate bodies from the desert's dry air, this natural preservation was lost. And so began a new challenge: to imitate nature's work through human skill. According to G. Elliot Smith, early embalmers experimented with wrapping bodies in linen soaked with simple resins and oils. They did not yet remove the organs. Their goal was merely to keep the shape intact. By the 2nd and 3rd dynasties, traces of deliberate preservation appear. Layers of linen, sometimes mixed with plaster or natron, forming a hard shell around the body. It was the birth of an idea, the first step toward deliberate scientific preservation. As Egypt entered the Old Kingdom, embalming became part of a larger funerary system. Tombs of stone and brick now sheltered the dead, but also removed them from the preserving sands. To counter this, embalmers developed new methods, coating the body with oils, filling cavities with natron salts, and introducing linen wrapping as ritual art. It was also during this era that we see the appearance of canopic jars, containers for the internal organs. Their presence marks a crucial innovation, the recognition that decay began from within. By removing the viscera and storing them separately under the protection of the 4 sons of Horus, embalmers turned a natural process into a sacred science. In the Middle Kingdom, methods grew more consistent. Faces were molded with resin-soaked cloth to retain individuality, a symbolic prelude to what later centuries would perfect. By the 18th dynasty, mummification reached its first great peak. This was the age of Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and the dazzling courts of the New Kingdom. Now the brain was regularly removed through the nostrils, a delicate process described in Egyptian mummies as one of the great technical triumphs of the embalmers. The organs were carefully extracted, dried, treated with resins, and either sealed in canopic jars or wrapped and returned to the body cavity. The corpse was then filled with aromatic substances, myrrh, frankincense, cedar oil, and resin, to maintain volume and scent. The body was wrapped in hundreds of yards of fine linen, layer upon layer, each accompanied by sacred words. The arms were crossed on the chest, a new royal posture symbolizing divine resurrection. The results were astonishing. The mummies of Yuya and Thuya, found almost intact, reveal lifelike features that have survived more than 3,000 years. This was not mere preservation. It was artistry perfected. By the 21st dynasty, the craft of mummification had reached its highest sophistication, what G. Elliot Smith called the age of anatomical realism. Here the goal was not only to preserve the body's integrity, but to restore its vitality and beauty. Embalmers began injecting or inserting materials beneath the skin, sawdust, clay, or fat, to rebuild shrunken limbs and faces. Cheeks were padded, the abdomen reshaped, even the lips and eyelids restored. Artificial eyes made from stone, glass, or painted wood gave the mummies a haunting, lifelike gaze. Bodies were tinted, red for men, yellow for women, echoing traditional artistic conventions. Each mummy became both portrait and vessel, a sculpted likeness designed to welcome back the spirit in its perfect form. In these centuries, faith and craftsmanship became one, producing the most beautiful mummies ever created in Egypt's long history. But as Egypt's political power waned, so too did the precision of its sacred art. From the 22nd dynasty onward, the focus shifted from the body to the coffin. The embalmers' once meticulous methods gave way to speed and decoration. Bodies were drenched in hot bitumen, a natural asphalt, turning them dark and rigid. This crude process often destroyed the body's finer features, yet the outer wrappings grew ever more elaborate, painted with bright colors and gilded designs. Some mummies of this period, Smith and Dawson note, even contain mixed remains, bones of several individuals bound together, mere symbols of a practice now hollowed of meaning. The embalmer's art had become ritual imitation, magnificent on the surface but spiritually and scientifically in decline. From the earliest linen wrappings to the masterworks of the New Kingdom, mummification evolved from imitation of nature to a precise union of science and faith, and finally, to an ornate echo of its former glory. Yet even in its decline, it never lost its purpose. Every resin, every incision, every prayer carried one message: the body must endure, because life itself is eternal. As Elliot Smith concluded, the Egyptian embalmers did not merely preserve the dead, they created the eternal. Join us for Science Salah Lotfy channel as we explore the sacred amulets, rituals, and funerary treasures that completed the Egyptian journey to immortality.
In ancient Egypt, death was not an end. It was a carefully orchestrated transformation. Every movement, every chant, every object that accompanied the dead had a meaning, a promise that life would continue beyond the tomb. In this episode, inspired by the classic 1924 book Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren R. Dawson, we explore the sacred rituals and funerary accessories that completed the Egyptian journey to eternity. From the solemn funeral procession to the magical amulets hidden within the wrappings, every detail was a thread in the fabric of immortality. The path to eternity began long before the body entered its tomb. As described by Smith and Dawson, the funeral procession was both public and sacred, a journey across the boundary between worlds. The mummy, adorned and perfumed, was carried on a sacred sledge, accompanied by priests, mourners, and family. Women dressed as Isis and Nephthys lamented beside the bier, their cries echoing the mythic mourning of the goddesses for Osiris. Offerings of food, incense, and flowers were placed along the way, symbolizing sustenance for the spirit. The procession ended at the tomb, not as a burial, but as a ritual of rebirth. At the entrance to the tomb, the most sacred rite was performed, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This ritual, recorded in numerous tomb paintings and texts, was meant to restore the senses of the deceased, the ability to see, breathe, eat and speak in the afterlife. A priest, often wearing the mask of Anubis, touched the mouth and eyes of the mummy or its statue with special instruments shaped like adzes and rods. As he recited the ancient formulae, he symbolically revived the divine faculties within the body. This was the moment when the dead became alive again, capable of participating in the eternal cycle of life, death, and resurrection. Smith and Dawson note that this act was considered the final preparation before sealing the tomb, ensuring that the spirit was once again complete. Once the ritual was complete, the mummy was placed within layers of protection. Over time, coffins evolved from simple wooden boxes into anthropoid forms, sculpted to resemble the deceased. These human-shaped coffins, richly painted and inscribed with sacred texts, represented a second body for the soul. Their faces bore serene smiles, symbolizing eternal peace. Covering the mummy was often an intricate cartonnage casing made from layers of linen or papyrus, soaked in plaster and painted with divine symbols. It depicted gods like Osiris, Anubis, and Hathor, as well as spells from the Book of the Dead, meant to protect the traveler in the underworld. As Smith wrote, "The coffin was no mere container. It was an image of resurrection, a bridge between man and God." Next came the canopic jars, among the most iconic symbols of Egyptian burial practice. These 4 vessels safeguarded the internal organs, each protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus, under the guardianship of goddesses. Imseti, with a human head, protected the liver, watched over by Isis. Hapi, the baboon-headed god, guarded the lungs, under the care of Nephthys. Duamutef, the jackal-headed protector, watched the stomach, aided by Neith. Kibesenuef, with the head of a falcon, protected the intestines under Selkut's wing. Each organ was dried, wrapped and stored in its jar, ensuring that the body remained whole in the spiritual sense. Later in the 21st dynasty, embalmers innovated again, returning the treated organs to the body cavity accompanied by small wax figures of these divine guardians. Hidden between the hundreds of linen layers were amulets, miniature objects charged with protective magic. Smith and Dawson described these as the silent prayers of the embalmers, each symbol carrying power and purpose. Among the most sacred was the heart scarab placed over the chest to prevent the heart from betraying the deceased in the final judgment before Osiris. Then came the Jed pillar, symbol of stability and endurance, representing the backbone of Osiris. The knot of Isis, or Tayet, offered the blessing and protection of the goddess herself, and covering the incision made during embalming was often a small golden plate, engraved with the Eye of Horus, sealing the wound both physically and magically. These objects were not ornaments. They were spiritual armor, ensuring that the dead would rise whole and unharmed in the world beyond. Each of these rituals, from the funeral procession to the sealing of the tomb, reflected the Egyptian conviction that eternal life demanded eternal care. They combined faith, craftsmanship, and scientific understanding into a single sacred purpose.
For the ancient Egyptians, mummification was not simply the art of preserving the dead. It was the science of eternity. But this idea, born on the banks of the Nile, would travel far beyond Egypt. In this final episode, inspired by Egyptian Mummies by G. Elliot Smith and Warren R. Dawson, we trace the global legacy of Egypt's embalming tradition. How the dream of conquering decay spread from Thebes to the world, leaving its mark on cultures across Africa, Europe, and even the Americas. At the heart of Egyptian mummification was a profound belief. The body must remain whole so the soul could return. For over 3,000 years, this conviction shaped every aspect of Egyptian religion, medicine, and art. The embalmer's craft united chemistry and theology. Preserving the flesh was preserving identity itself. As Smith and Dawson explain, Egypt's achievement was not only technical but philosophical. It redefined what it meant to live forever. This concept, that physical preservation could secure spiritual survival, became one of Egypt's most powerful exports to the ancient world. South of Egypt, in Nubia and the Sudanese desert, the influence of Egyptian funerary customs spread early. Archaeological evidence shows that Nubian elites adopted wrapping techniques, painted coffins, and the use of amulets directly modeled on Egyptian examples. Although the materials were simpler, the symbolism was identical, a clear sign that Egypt's concept of preserving the body for eternity had crossed cultural boundaries. Here, mummification was not imitation, but continuation, a regional adaptation of a spiritual technology that began along the Nile. When Greek travelers like Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus visited Egypt, they were astonished by what they saw. Their writings, carefully analyzed by Smith and Dawson, became the first Western descriptions of the mummification process. As Egypt fell under Greek and later Roman rule, the practice transformed once more. In the Greco-Roman period, embalming became a blend of Egyptian ritual and classical artistry. The mummies of this era, especially the Fayum portraits, display lifelike painted faces set into the wrappings, merging Egyptian ideas of eternity with Greek ideals of realism. For the first time, two visions of immortality met: the Egyptian belief in preservation and the Greek celebration of individuality. Far across the ocean, thousands of years later, another civilization pursued the same dream: the Inca and pre-Inca cultures of South America. High in the Andes and along the Peruvian coast, ancient peoples developed their own forms of mummification. They too removed organs, used resins and cloth wrappings, and arranged the dead in lifelike poses, sometimes surrounding them with food, jewelry, and tools for the next life. Although there was no contact between Egypt and the Andes, the similarity is striking. Smith and Dawson saw this as proof of a universal human instinct: the desire to preserve the form of life as a shield against oblivion. Whether on the Nile or the Altiplano, the message was the same: the body is the memory of the soul. Centuries after Egypt's dynasties had faded, Europe rediscovered the mummy, but in strange and unexpected ways. During the Middle Ages, mummy powder, ground fragments of real mummies, was sold as medicine, believed to cure wounds and diseases. The very substance that once symbolized immortality became a commodity of superstition. By the Renaissance, explorers, scientists, and collectors turned their attention to Egypt's tombs. Figures like Napoleon's scholars and later Victorian archaeologists began unwrapping mummies in public spectacles, part science, part theater. What had once been a sacred ritual became a symbol of modern curiosity. The Western world's obsession with the mystery of death conquered by knowledge. Today, the mummies of Egypt continue to teach us, through radiology, genetics, and chemistry. Modern imaging has revealed heart disease, arthritis, and dental decay, confirming the findings first documented by Smith and Dawson in 1924. In many ways, modern medicine is completing what the ancient embalmers began, using preservation not for eternity, but for understanding. Through science, we have restored their voices. The dead speak once again, not in prayers, but in data, the language of evidence. From the sands of Egypt to the mountains of Peru, from the tombs of Thebes to the labs of today, the mummy endures, as a symbol of human defiance against decay and the search for meaning beyond the grave. As Egyptian Mummies concludes, Egypt's true legacy is not the bodies it preserved, but the idea that life and knowledge can outlast death. In every age, that dream continues, reborn, reinterpreted, and rediscovered. This is for Science Salah Lotfy channel, where the past lives on through the science of eternity.
Before we conclude this remarkable journey through time, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude both personally and on behalf of the For Science Salah Lotfy channel, to the distinguished scholars whose work continues to enlighten generations. Our sincere thanks to Dr. Grafton, Elliot Smith and Dr. Warren Royal Dawson, the authors of Egyptian Mummies, for their groundbreaking research that revealed the deep connection between science, faith and the quest for immortality in ancient Egypt. Special appreciation also goes to A. Horace Gerard and K. Lee Pemberton, whose woodcuts and illustrations added beauty and life to this enduring masterpiece. This is Professor Dr. Salah Lotfy from the Egyptian Atomic Energy Authority, expressing my deepest thanks to our viewers and followers for joining us on this exploration of the science of eternity here on For Science Salah Lotfy channel.